Hi, everyone. This is Jackie Cooper with Crypto Mom 2 Talk Show. And I want to thank everyone for hopping on this episode and also remind you for sure to definitely like and subscribe because there are many, many people that I am talking to, including my guest today, that have some very interesting information. And you definitely want to stay in the know because this area is constantly evolving and it's all about education and resources. And it's really important that you stay connected. For those that are new to Crypto Mom 2, I definitely want to thank you again for listening. My background is that I'm a lawyer and I'm also an educator and I'm also a mom. And I started my journey a few years ago. It's amazing how fast time goes, but it's the amount of time that I've been in this space is short in comparison to others. But I started the show because I realized that I wanted to kind of document my journey, my education, and also help others as they were learning. And as I interviewed people around the world, I realized how much creativity there was in the space and also how this could be a career path for those that are looking for this opportunity, and just the change of technology and how it's going to help us in so many different ways. And again, my words don't do it justice, but with that, I would like to welcome my guest, Rohan. And how are you doing today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So I want you to take a moment to introduce yourself and your company. And for everyone who's listening on the talk side, hop over to the YouTube side as well. If you don't have paper and pen, I will be embedding all of the contact links so that way you can reach out and you can actually connect with various resources that we're going to be talking about. Both from, the Twitter side, the Telegram side, and the company side. So Rohan, why don't you go ahead and share who you are and what the company is, and then we're going to kind of dive into conversation about what you're doing.
Sure. So hey everyone, I'm Rohan. I'm the co-founder and CEO at Cypherock. So at Cypherock, essentially, we are building the safest Web3 wallet in the world. My personal journey in crypto started somewhere around 5 to 6 years ago. I went to a hackathon, was very interested to build on the decentralization stack, found out, okay, Ethereum, a technology like Ethereum exists, but then was, really shocked to see something digital being sold for like $21. This is January 2017. I was like, who is buying this thing for $21? It's so expensive. It's digital. I mean, the whole intangible nature of crypto wasn't making sense to me. But I was fascinated by the technology. We made some useful things on the hackathon, and I didn't buy Ethereum. I was just playing around on the testnet. But fast forward 5 months, I was the same person who bought Ethereum at $250. So that's how the journey started for me. So it was 2017, crypto was on the rise. The whole ICO boom was there. Whether that was a fortunate or unfortunate thing, the time will tell. But that sort of introduced me into crypto because, I was curious, why was this thing which was rising so much? What is the interest behind it? So my curiosity, drove me to start investing and trading into the different assets, try to learn about these ICO, what they are trying to do and everything. And then January 2018 arrived when most of the market crashed, and we realized, okay, we are not geniuses. Like everyone thinks they are a genius in a bull market. It's the bear market that teaches you these things. So we thought, we'll rather, work on the technology side of things rather than speculating on these assets, which we basically have no control over. Given that, me and my co-founders, we are both engineers by trade. So we were like, it's much better to work on the technology side of things because that's where we are good at. We are not good at trading. We just were lucky at the right time, I would say. So we started, looking into different areas or different problem statements in the space where we as unique individuals can really solve with our unique skill sets. And self-custody was something which was very, sort of eye-catching for us because when we found out how difficult it was to self-custody at that time, we realized, okay, this needs to be solved. Why do we have seed phrases? why is there no inheritance? Like some very fundamental basic problems that we found out with the self-custody space. And if you look into 2017 to fast forward 6 years today, it's the exchanges which has the most of the mind share in the industry today. And whether we like it or not, they are sort of the banks of the Web3 ecosystem, right? So eventually what we personally realized was that over the period of time, they are going to be regulated as banks. And so if you don't have self-custody being workable at scale, then we'll basically have finance 2.0 all over again, because these exchanges will be regulated bank. And so it will be the same sort of old infrastructure that we already have. So self-custody was something we thought of was a very critical component of the whole ecosystem that needs to scale up for the masses. And so that was what became our mission statement, that we wanted to solve self-custody for the masses. So we went down to working on this, try to think everything from first principles, not thinking what is already there in the market. We were fortunate enough to be backed by some of the best investors globally. And right now, it took us about 2.5 years to get the R&D done. We are already done with a beta. We already have few customers from 7 to 8 different countries, and now we are looking to sort of scale up. So that's been our journey so far.
I love everything that you said. Now, you've also mentioned a lot of different words that we're going to define. So that way, if individuals are not familiar, because as you know, I'm all a part of education, I want to make sure people understand. So you mentioned, I'm going to kind of go through my list here in my head. You mentioned Web 2, Web 3. Let's start there. What would you define as the difference between Web 2 and Web 3? Because again, we all remember when the internet was created. Well, most of us remember, some of us remember because we're old enough to remember when it was created. But, again, there are others that were born into it and just, it's kind of natural. But what's the difference between Web 2 and Web 3?
So Web 2 is essentially, what you know of internet today, which is for every service that you want to use today, or any product that you want to use today on the internet, you basically have a username and password. And that's how you basically authenticate onto a specific Web2 based network, right? So let's take an example of Facebook, maybe Google, maybe Amazon. It's the same authentication mechanism, wherein the major difference is that all of the data and all of the interactions happen on someone else's property, which is, let's assume, Facebook for this instance. So if you're creating a Facebook account, that is being created in a Facebook database, which they control essentially, right? Which was great because that business model allowed you to use their service for free. And they were, for the scale that they were getting at, they were, okay with using it for free in exchange for your valuable data over time, right? Which they eventually monetize it, right? So you use a specific service that is their property, but then over time, what people realize is, these big companies actually serve their shareholders and not their users over time. So because every company have these two set of stakeholders, one is your shareholder and one is your customers or their users, right? And over time, it's like a company is built to serve their shareholders over their users. That's always going to be a case if you are a for-profit company. And that is what happened over time, right? So you see all of these incidents where Facebook bans so-and-so individual, like the prime minister, the president of the United States over its platform for whatever reason, right? So essentially, they control those assets, and therefore they have the ability to control what is going to be there on the platform, essentially. And then Bitcoin came around. Bitcoin basically started the whole Web3 movement, I would say, wherein it was the first network in the world without a central authority. So Facebook, it's a central authority, it controls the complete network. Whereas Bitcoin, there's no central authority behind Bitcoin. So there's no person on an organization or a group of people that you can point to a gun at, and if they die tomorrow, the network is going to stop. That is never going to be the case. So it has essentially started the movement of having a decentralized network where there's no single point of failure. There's no single organization or group of people controlling the whole network. And then Bitcoin was essentially started for decentralizing money, because even money is sort of controlled by different governments. And then people looked into Bitcoin. They were like, okay, this is a great technology to decentralize money. Well, is this possible to sort of use the same technology to decentralize other aspects or other use cases, right? So social media being one, and then you have Ethereum being majorly used for DeFi application, where all of the different financial primitives are being decentralized right now and using the similar sort of infrastructure essentially. So that is where the mind shifted. So it's like Google at one point used to say that we'll never be evil, but then how it turned out. So, but the motto in the Web3 ecosystem is you can't be evil. So it's like the motto shifted from I don't want to be evil to I can't be evil. So even if a protocol tries to be evil, it can't be evil essentially, because it's all permissionless, because it's decentralized. There's no central authority that sort of controls how a protocol needs to be governed.
I'm gonna interrupt you for just a quick second to say for everyone who's listening, because I usually mention it at the beginning, but I didn't. These shows are not financial advice, so you definitely have to invest at your own risk. You have to educate yourself. So you mentioned about protocols and things like that. Protocol is like the business plan of a coin or the business that's on the Web3. So it's really important that you read those protocols, those white papers, those light papers. And one of the things that I just want to mention for everyone who's listening is that even though the intent of a lot of protocols are good, sometimes even those businesses fail. And so because of maybe lack of funding or whatever. And so it is important to know that you have to, that there, no matter whether it's a traditional business or an online Web3 or Web2, you have to do your research because again, as you navigate in any space, there's always the chance of loss just as well as the chance of gain. So you have to do this with eyes wide open. So I want to transition. I love what you were saying. I want to transition over to some other concepts that you talked about. You talked about wallets and you talked about security and you talked about self-custody. People might not understand what a wallet is or what self-custody is. So why don't you share a little bit more about that from your perspective? Because I also love the fact that your background is tech, is the engineering, it's the tech side, and you are doing what, I see a lot of individuals in this space are doing. You're looking at what are the problems and your goal is to solve the problem. So go ahead and share.
Sure. So I would say the easiest analogy here is gold, right? So there are essentially two ways to keep your gold. One is either you basically keep it in a bank locker with a bank, and that's where you keep it, as a safety, deposit box or whatever. And the second way is, which most of the people find easier and safer, is to actually keep it with themselves in their homes, right? So that's how I would like to sort of differentiate between custody and self-custody. So in this case, the gold which you keep with your bank is essentially a custody sort of thing, and then the gold which you keep with yourself, it's essentially self-custody. Now with Web 2, it's like everything was custody. You could never self-custody anything. You can never self-custody the data that you have already given to Facebook, right? And then once you give it to them, it's like they don't need to take permission from you to access that data every time you want, because it's stored with themselves, right? That's where Web3 really comes in, wherein the crypto that is there, the asset itself or the token, there are two ways to keep it. One is with an exchange. So you might be aware about different crypto exchanges like Binance, Coinbase, and the others, wherein you are basically custodying your tokens, protocols, Bitcoin, Ethereum, whatever, with a specific exchange. You are trusting them that they are not going to screw against you. Or there's another way to keep it with yourself. That's what Web3 enables, right? And that's enabled through something called as wallets. In the Web3 technical terms, it's like, just like you have key to your home, there's something called as a private key, which sort of allows you to give you access to your crypto, right? So it's essentially a key to unlock your crypto. The crypto itself is stored on the blockchain, but to unlock that crypto, you need that private key. And the thing is, you need to secure this private key. Otherwise, if someone else gets access to this private key, they can take out your crypto without taking your permission, because everything is permissionless and everything is pseudonymous in this ecosystem.
So I've heard, and well, I mean, and I don't know, you're going to be able to explain it better than me. You have your private keys, your seed words, and for those that I'll give my link about the crypto wallet wealth organizer. You're definitely supposed to have it offline, even though I know you're going to be talking about things that you're creating, which will also help as well. What's the difference between the public key and the private key? Can you explain? Because I heard that if you did lose your private seed words, that there's a back way to maybe recover. Is that true? You're frozen. Okay, there you are. You're back.
Yeah, I'm so sorry.
That's okay. That's okay. It's all good. Did you hear the question that I was asking you?
Yeah, I'm so sorry. I forgot. I didn't hear the question.
That's okay. I will ask you. So what I've heard in talking to others is that you have your private key, but I also heard that there is a public key that is another way to backdoor, so that way you can, if you had to, you could maybe recreate. Can you explain and clarify what I heard about that information? So for everyone who's on, we're having a little bit of technical challenge. Rohan, hi Rohan, you're
I'm
back.
so sorry.
It's okay. It's
There's
okay.
some power issue, so yeah.
Yes, not a problem. Not a problem. I explained to the listeners that we were having a little bit of a tech challenge. Why don't you go ahead and explain more about what your company's doing and how you're solving the problem?
Sure. So just like you have a username and password to authenticate yourself into a Web2 based product or service, that's how you authenticate it there. And then in case you lose, your password, you can go and click forget password. And then Facebook will give you a unique link to reset your password. That's how authentication and recovery works in the Web2 space, right? But if you are actually like self-custodying your wallet, the thing is there's no Facebook, there's no central authority to look after you, essentially, right? So similar to your username and password, in Web3, you have something called as a private key and a public key. A private key is similar to your password. You have to keep it safe with yourself. And the public key is essentially similar to like a username. So you give it to someone, and then through that, they will be able to transfer your crypto if you want to receive it from them. And if you want to send your crypto, then you need to use your private key to actually authorize a specific transaction. Now, the key difference here between a password and a private key is password is something you can generate it yourself. You can keep it as long as you want or keep it as short as you want. But private keys are very lengthy in nature. And so you can't really remember it. It's practically not possible for you to remember it just like you remember your passwords. So you have to either write it down somewhere or you have to store it somewhere, essentially, right? So a wallet is essentially like a mechanism to store that securely. A wallet could be a paper wallet wherein you have stored your private key on a piece of paper. A wallet could be, something like your desktop. It could be a mobile phone app, or it could be something as secure as a separate hardware built specifically for keeping that private key, right? So there's various ways of keeping that private key secure. And that's reasonably a trade-off between convenience and security. The problem with the private key over the long period of time is if you lose it, your funds are going to be inaccessible forever. That's the most important part here. That's the first important part, which is solving the loss problem with private keys. If you lose it, what happens then? Because if you lose your password, you can go to Facebook and they'll help you recover your account. But in Web3, if you lose your private key, it's gone forever. Your assets are never going to be recoverable. So that's challenge number one. How do you solve the loss problem? Challenge number two is the theft problem, which is, if let's assume I'm a hacker and if I get access to your private key somehow, I can basically make a transaction from your account without your permission. And once I transact it out, there's no way to reverse that transaction. So with the banking system, you can still go to the bank and say, hey, I did a wrong transaction or whatever. And there are some cases where you will be able to reverse that transaction because it's the bank that control the whole experience. But with Web3, all the transactions are irreversible. So once they're done forever. You will not be able to reverse them. And so if a hacker manages to make an unauthorized transaction on your behalf from your wallet, there's no way you will be able to get the funds back, number one. And number two, because these networks are pseudo-anonymous, there's no concept as so-called as KYC. You will never be able to file a case against the hacker in the court unless you magically find out who the hacker is. Until that case, it's not possible to actually get your assets back, or maybe file a case against them in the court. So how do you solve for both of these loss and theft issues? And that's where we as a company come in. So we at Cypherock, we are building the safest crypto wallets or safest Web3 wallet. And the problems that we intended to solve for are as follows. So the number one thing is, you have to realize everything in the world is hackable today, because there's nothing 100% secure you can have. That's like just from first principles. An exchange can be hacked, Coinbase, Binance, all of those have been hacked in some form or another in the past. Similar with other wallets. So if you consider someone like MetaMask, which is usually what most of the people use if you're using a crypto wallet, or maybe something like a hardware wallet wherein your private keys are stored in a specific hardware. Even they have been hacked before. So the top two ones, they have been hacked in the past 2 to 3 years, right? So there's nothing 100% secure that you can ever create. And so the way we thought about a solution here is, we know that hardware can be hacked, but what if we never stored the private key itself in a single place, so that even if the hardware or one component of the hardware is breached, your funds are still not compromisable, right? So we essentially, in the most layman terms, we decentralize the private key itself also. Whereas with all of the other wallets, it's stored in a single place. With us, we decentralize the private key. So on the technical side of things, how this works is, your private key, instead of being stored in a single place, we sort of distribute it into 5 parts, which you can store in different locations. So one in your bank locker, one in your home, one in your office, any 5 places that you like. And we don't control this. It's the user who's controlling this whole experience. And we will never know where you store these, because these are completely offline parts. It's a hardware product, just to be clear.
Is this what's called a cold card, or what is this called? Does it have a name?
New way of doing this. This is
new way of doing it.
Yeah. So it's like every other wallet was this single form of hardware when your private keys were stored. But this is the first time someone is attempting to do something like this, where your private keys are not stored in a single place. It's decentralized into 5 parts. But the magical thing here is, whenever you want to make a transaction, you don't need to fetch all of these 5 parts. You just need to fetch any 2 out of these 5 in any order to make a transaction. So maybe you fetch the first part and the 5th part, that is enough to make a transaction. Or you maybe fetch the 2nd part and the 4th part, that is enough to make a transaction.
That's amazing.
Yeah, that's how it is. The closest there is to this kind of solution is something called as Multisig, which is sort of there. So Multisig implementation for Bitcoin is different. Multisig implementation for Ethereum is different. The problem with Multisig is it doesn't work for every sort of asset.
So why don't you go ahead, and I love your flow of information. I don't want to interrupt it, but explain to people what multi-sig means.
Sure. So most of the wallets are generally operate on the principle of single sig, which is single signature.
Yes.
When you have a private key, you use it to sign a transaction, which in layman terms, it means to authorize a specific transaction.
Yes.
And then that's how, once that is broadcasted to the blockchain network, it gets accepted. And then, whatever transaction that you intended to do actually gets executed, right? With multi-sig, things are a little different, wherein think of it like this. There is like 3 people in a specific company. And then if you want to do a Bitcoin multi-sig, transaction. So what that would mean is you can have a specific scheme set up, or in layman terms, it's like access control inside an organization, wherein maybe there are three people, the CEO, CMO, and CTO, and you need at least two out of the three to basically construct a specific transaction and then accept it. So it's like, even if, let's assume, the CEO goes rogue and wants to do a transaction, he alone cannot execute that transaction. At least two out of these three people needs to go rogue in order to make a unauthorized transaction, essentially, right? So essentially, it's like 2 of 3 scheme, wherein you need any two, but at least two of the people to make a transaction. That's the multisig premise. The key difference with our implementation and what multisig offers is three core differences. So number one is multisig happens on chain, which means the whole construction and execution of a specific transaction happens on the blockchain itself. So it's a little costly to do it because it's a little complicated transaction. You'll have to pay a lot more fees. The second problem with that implementation is it only works for certain chains. So Bitcoin has been the most sort of reliable chain over the years. And therefore, I personally trust only Bitcoin's multisig implementation. But if there is a faulty implementation of specific chain, things could go really, really long. So this actually happened roughly about 6-7 years ago when Ethereum split into Ethereum and Ethereum Classic. And the specific reason for that split was because there was something called as a DAO hack, which was a faulty multisig contract through which the hackers were able to compromise somewhere between $100 to $300 worth of Ethereum out of that contract, right? And that's why the chain split, because of their political sort of issues at that time. We'll not go over that. But that is what I'm trying to say, that even multisig implementation could be faulty on a specific chain. And the thing with blockchain is, if it's done, right? So you can't like reverse things back on a specific blockchain. And some of the newer blockchains don't even have a multisig implementation natively on that. So how do we solve for this? So the way we solve this is we use something called a Shamir secret sharing, which is the parent technology behind multisig. So multisig is actually derived from Shamir secret sharing. And the great part about Shamir secret sharing is it actually works off chain. So it doesn't need to rely on a specific blockchain. It works off the chain, which means we can provide similar security guarantees that multisig provides, but for every blockchain that exists today and for every blockchain that are going to exist tomorrow. Because it's completely off chain, it's completely blockchain agnostic. So it doesn't need to comply with a specific blockchain. So it's like the holy grail, I would say, right? So any blockchain that doesn't have it can have similar security guarantees with us, and it's much more easier to use. With multisig, it's like you have to have these different wallets, initialize all of them, make specific blockchain transactions or blockchain calls individually through those wallets. But in this, it's like you just tap a card and it's done. So very similar to how your debit cards and credit cards works, but at 10x more security than any other wallet out there in the world today. So that's our key differentiator, which is, as I explained you need any 2 out of the 5 to make a transaction. So it's like the way we solve the loss problem is, even if you lost any 3 out of the 5, you still have the remaining 2 to recover back your asset. So you're okay to lose any 3 out of the 5 and still be safe that your funds are safe. That's not the case with your other wallets. If you lose them and your seed phrase, your funds are gone forever, right? But in this case, even if you lost any 3, your funds are still secure. That's how we solve the loss problem. The way it solves the theft problem is, now for a hacker to compromise your assets, number one, they'll have to find the locations of at least 2 out of these 5 things. So that's the biggest problem they have to solve for. Hypothetically speaking, they managed to find it. Let's assume that they managed to find the device and maybe one of the cards. Then they'll have to crack open the pin / the password protection on top of these cards and the device, which is practically impossible because we use the same security, solutions, which are actually, if you can see on the screen, these are the cards.
Yeah.
These are the cards and this is the device. So essentially, when you buy the product, you get 1 of this device and 4 of these cards, essentially, which means the total of the 5 things, essentially.
Yeah.
Right? And in order for you to make a transaction, you just need to fetch any one of the card, tap it on the device and enter the pin that you had set, and a transaction will be done, right? For a hacker to compromise this, they actually have to crack open these cards. And these cards are not your normal RFID cards. These are the same cards used in the banking industry to make your debit cards and credit cards. So if they manage to crack open the pin on top of this, which relies on the 50-year security guarantees of the banking industry, the banking industry probably is going to go down before us, I would say, right? If they're able to do so. So it relies on the security guarantees that is already existing in the banking industry since the past 50 years. We are just sort of porting in a more user-friendly way for the users of the Web3 ecosystem. So that's the first problem we solve.
So I'm glad that you showed the visual of what the product looked like, because I think that that's important for people to see. I know that when everyone who's listening goes over to your platform, they'll be able to look at both the product as well as look at, you know, the company background and that type of thing. You were about to share the next thing that you solved, the next problem, I think. I interrupted
so
you.
that was the first problem, which is how do we make the security of these wallets 10x than what is already out there, right? So that's the first problem. The second and the biggest problem we see in the space is the seed phrase, which is every wallet that you use today, you have to back up your private keys on something called as a seed phrase, which is like those 24 words that you have to write down on a piece of paper and store it somewhere else. And the reason why you need to do it today is because what if you lose your wallet? What if your laptop gets corrupted? What if the hardware that you bought, what if that's lost? What if it gets corrupted, right? Due to a malicious software update or whatever. Like there are tons of, different things which could happen to that wallet, right? And therefore, if anything happens to your wallet, you need to have that piece of paper along with you in order for you to basically port or recover back your assets. But think about this. On one hand, you're using something as a wallet to secure your funds, but on the other hand, you're exposing the same sort of private keys on a piece of paper, right? It doesn't make sense for a user, because for a hacker, he will not try to hack your wallet. He'll go for your seed phrase, because it's literally your life savings on a piece of paper that I can just take it away and then transfer it out, right? It's much, much easier for me to hack it, right? So it doesn't make sense for us. And that's how all of the wallets in the world, at least for the Web3 ecosystem, works today. We were like, we need to solve this because it's a big blocker for the users who come into the ecosystem. Even the NFT artists, the thing is, those guys, and we can't expect the general masses to be technical, right? We have to design products which are usable by masses, which doesn't require to have technical expertise to use it, right? And so what happens with NFT artists today is they use these wallets, they use something like a MetaMask wallet. They don't know the technicalities about using a wallet. A random stranger on the internet says, hey, you want 5 ETH, 10 ETH, in order for you to do it, give me a seed phrase. And they don't realize the importance of seed phrase. Then they give their seed phrase to random strangers on the internet, and they just lose out their NFTs or whatever fund that they have stored on that wallet, right? And it would be wrong to say that a user needs to take care of this, because the ecosystem has to do better to solve for this. And that's where we sort of are trying to come in. So what we have done is, because your private keys are never stored in a single place, you don't need to back it up on a piece of paper. That's the magical thing here, because your funds your private keys are sort of decentralized into 4 of these cards and the device. So it's like, even if you lose 3 of them, your funds are still recoverable from these 2. Or if you lost these 3 parts of them, your funds are still recoverable from these 2. So you don't need to back up your private keys or your funds on a piece of paper. You don't need that. So we have completely removed the need to store it on a piece of paper and make your complete cryptocurrencies insecure in the first place. So that is the big sort of challenge that we solve for in the ecosystem, that you don't need to back it up on a piece of paper. It's gone for the users. Now, it's not that we are trying to gatekeep it. If you still want to view your seed phrase, you can still do it through the device. So that's still doable, right? If you maybe you didn't like the product, or maybe you are more interested to use a Ledger wallet or whatever, any other wallet, you can still view the seed phrase and transfer it out into another wallet, because crypto is all about being open and then be collaborative rather than try to gatekeep everything. So that's the second problem we solve.
I love it. I love it. Was there a third problem? Otherwise, I was going to ask you a question.
Yeah, the third problem is, again, a very important problem, which is how do we solve for crypto inheritance? And I believe this is something very interesting to you on a personal level as well, since you are from the, the law background, which is with all of the other asset classes, it's the government and the banks that take care of the inheritance process for the user. In case something happens to the user, it's the bank and the government that, execute that will, or essentially, help transfer the assets in case something happens to the user. But with crypto, that's somewhat very difficult, because there's one way you can do is give your seed phrase to your lawyer, who will then transfer your assets to your loved one. But what if the lawyer goes rogue? Nothing against you, but like that is a hypothetical situation that could happen, right? There could be malicious attempts like that. So you obviously, and on the second hand, there's a nominee that could be your wife, your husband, your parents, whoever you want to transfer your assets eventually to, in case something happens to you. So you trusted them right now, you gave them your seed phrase, you gave them your access to your wallets. But hypothetically speaking, what if the relationship changes? Because things like this happen in inheritance, right? Like people fight over money. I mean, and as unfortunate as that is, but that is the practical scenario which happens on a day-to-day basis all over the world. So you obviously cannot give your private keys while you're alive, because what if things go wrong? And for obvious reasons, you cannot give it after you're dead, because you're already dead. So how do you transfer these assets? When do you transfer the assets? And how do you make sure that the control and the privacy of the assets are maintained throughout the process, right? Very fundamental problems that exist, with crypto inheritance today as well. So the way we help here is we enable users to transfer access to these assets from them to their loved ones without us ever knowing how much crypto they hold. So we'll never know how much crypto you hold as a user. And secondly, we'll never be able to compromise it ourselves ever as well. So it's like, even if we want to, we'll never be able to compromise it, but still help you transfer it in case something happens to you. And the reason that is possible is because these cards are always offline. So even if we want to, we can never access them. That's the key differentiator. And that's why a hardware solution is necessary to solve something like a crypto inheritance problem, wherein even if we want to, we will never be able to get those assets out from you. So that's the inheritance thing is still in the design and the development process. We'll sort of share it more openly in the next couple of months with the users of how that is possible.
I agree with you, and this is one of the things that this is one of the reasons why I created my wallet organizer, which is obviously a lot simpler than what you created, and I appreciate what you created, and in terms of both the security aspect of it as well as the flexibility aspect of it. As a lawyer, I agree with you that that was a problem that as I spoke with people, I found out that people didn't have a will. They weren't sharing with families that they had invested in different altcoins or crypto or NFTs, and they didn't have an estate plan, or they had a will and they still weren't sharing. And so the challenge that I had as a professional and is that and as an educator and a mom, I think that everyone in your family, in your circle, needs to know what you're doing. I agree with you. There's privacy that you need to have because, again, in case of a family split or an argument, you want to make sure that you still have access to your assets. But I know that if you don't share with your family the existence and also teach them, and that's actually one of the reasons why I created the organizer, not just for the purpose of the seed phrases, it actually shows the steps of, now your solution's a little different, but for individuals that are opening up a wallet, some of it's app-based, some of it's web-based, some of the, you might need to use Google Authenticator, you might need to use the email. There's a lot of steps involved to get access to the information, the assets. So once you do move the assets over to something like yours, then it becomes a lot simpler. But these are steps that I think everyone needs to be thinking about. How do you how do you preserve what you are investing in? And again, these shows are not financial advice, but I'm all about organizing information, because if something does happen to you and you leave it on the blockchain and you haven't shared with your family, then all of a sudden that inheritance that you've tried to create for them is there forever, and you don't have
Yep.
any access. They don't have any access to it. So, your solution is very interesting from the perspective of not having to KYC, because of the fact that you have the cards and the other device. So these are things that I think are really important. So for everyone who's listening, we've had a really great conversation about this area. I know that Rohan and I probably can have ongoing episodes to discuss the technology, the solutions, and the options that are available for individuals. So this can be, the first of many episodes. I will put embedded within our conversation access to where you can reach him and explore and ask questions, because I'm all about, asking questions. I would also say that if you have any legal questions about the wills or estate planning or any other questions, message me. I might not have the answers, but I'm happy to do the research. If I do, if I am able to help you, I will help you. And one last thing that I'll mention is I recently wrote a book called The Bitcoin Cinderella, which is available on Amazon at bitcoincinderella.com. And the reason why I wrote that book is really to open up the discussions between the adults and youth, different ages, because the blockchain, just like you talked about, Rohan, Web 2 has been around for a while. Web 3 is going to be around for a while, and we need to all have these conversations. This is actually the first fairy tale series about Web 3. And so we really need to have this conversation so everyone feels comfortable navigating. And the solutions that you're, solving right now are going to make it easier for the next generation of individuals to come and kind of explore. But again, I want to thank you for being on. Any last minute thoughts that you want to share with the listeners?
I mean, it's like this ecosystem is here to stay. And I would say that ultimately you are going to be the person who's going to be responsible for your own wealth. So one of the things that I've noticed, and you would definitely agree with me, is people try to follow other people's advice too much. So I would say, even if whatever we are saying, like, do take it with a pinch of salt, and then do your own research as well. Don't blindly sort of follow us for everything that we say. I would say, double check and verify everything. And if you have that as a habit, that would be great, so that, we'll be able to, as an ecosystem, have lesser hacks and compromises over time. Because the biggest reason for hacks and compromises usually is people start following others, and then over time it converts into not just following but blindly following them. Then that's where things go wrong, I would say, right? So do listen to informational content, but always verify things on your end as well, both financial and both non-financial aspects of the Web3 ecosystem.
I agree with you totally. Thank you so much for being on. I look forward to our next conversation. Everyone, remember, be kind to yourself, be kind to others. We're all connected. We're all one world, and have a great day. And definitely remember, like and subscribe, because each conversation that I have on Crypto Mom 2 can maybe provide another bit of information for you as you do your own research. Thank you so much, and have a great day.